agree with me? If what happened here was a falling star, and if you'll grant that falling stars are kind of chance events, maybe you don't, maybe you think it was predestined since the Big Bang, I don't know. But if you think that little things can lead to somebody being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and their lineage being endangered and then extinguished, leading to this failure, then Gould's model leaves a whole lot more room for chance to make a big influence on the outcome. That's why he says, run back the tape, play it again, it will turn out differently. It's not specifically a chance hypothesis, that's not the point, but surely little teeny, seemingly insignificant things like which way the wind is blowing on a particular day can influence the outcome. It gives more room for chance to dramatically affect whether that one right there comes along. And I guess the other problem here is that no matter what you believe about chance here, Gould says that the outcomes are not predictable. And this led, so first of all, the first response of a Christian to that might be, no, I can't go with that. Let's vote for Conway Morris because he says at least we know how it's going to turn out. But one of Gould's critics, Dan Dennett, who is, atheist extraordinaire, actually hates this idea because he thinks Gould was, quote, searching for skyhooks, searching for some other reason why that came there. I think Dennett's crazy, but if I'm reading him right, he's saying, Gould's doing something kind of weird here. Adaptation explains the trajectory, so why would Gould do this? Why would he talk about that thing turning out differently every single time? I think he thinks we need some other explanation, a skyhook, whatever, to fill in the gaps. All right. Well, anyway, I think that if you really think that the structure of the universe needed to make that inevitable, then you probably have to vote for Conway Morris, even though some of the recent data that's coming out is suggesting that he's wrong about the exploration of morpho space and that vast, vast regions of morpho space are untouched, and for no good reason, as far as anyone can tell. And that your horror at Gould's idea, and I'll just close with this, is probably not justified, at least if you ask me. If you think that omnipotent God set it all up, then maybe you should stop worrying about how exactly we got to that point. Anyway, I'm just babbling now, so before I embarrass myself further, although getting fired wouldn't bother me at all, I'll just stop and we can take questions or discuss further now.
Doesn't it seem as if the chance killing off of one branch in this morpho space exploratorium may have wiped out, if that whole chain got wiped out, maybe it got wiped out, and there is a contingency to that backward chain, and it might not, they all do go back to some root. And ultimately, if you wipe out the whole chain, there may not be a way to explore that part of morpho space unless you contingently recreate something that's part of that chain. I don't know, I'm probably not making myself clear, but there are parts of morpho space that I think Paul Harper would agree with me, biophysically unachievable, like winged horses. I think there's good reasons why there aren't flying horses biophysically. But
I didn't say flying, I said winged.
All right.
They're used to attract mates. I mean, this is pretty easy to explain. Sorry, go ahead.
But
well, then you can argue that elephants are flying horses because they have big ears.
yeah, and there is Dumbo after all.
All right. Let's pray against flying elephants.
So I'm not so convinced that that white space is white because somehow or other it was destined to be white because somehow or other that morphology just couldn't continue. I mean, why couldn't those morphologies continue. They worked for a while, but they got wiped out. Maybe a asteroid wiped them out, or who knows what. Some huge cataclysmic change in the environment wiped that particular part out. But they were working for a while. Right?
Yeah, I'll just
It's
say
not
that
going to be all that white
agnostic
space is inevitable, like Conway Morris said.
Some white space does have to be inevitable, and Gould would agree, of course. He's written about wheeled animals and things like that. So he would say, well, of course there are things we can't get to even if you try. But I think he would say there's so much unrealized potential that evolution couldn't get to. Not because there's no way to get there, but because there's so much space and these guys would have gotten there and they didn't. I think the distinction might be that Conway Morris would say, if there's an attractor here, something really cool, then somebody's going to get there.
Yeah, well, what if there weren't ants? Then we wouldn't have ant eaters. All right? Now we have all this convergence.
We have termite eaters.
We have all this convergence because there are ants and termites. But if somehow or other there was some reason why those lineages didn't continue, then we wouldn't have that part of morphospace being explored.
All right, so I mean, I think we have a vote for, there's tons of white space that is not ruled out by any sort of good natural law or anything like that. It's just, well, we just didn't get there. That's very rational. I think Conway Morris is fine with that. Although he would suggest that the reason you couldn't get there is there was a barrier you couldn't get past, not because you didn't wait long enough for lung cancer. Yeah, Larry.
What role does the chemical environment play in this sort of thing? So you could have a chemical environment that creates these things which you can't get back to, so that space remains unexplored and you can't get to it anymore.
So in other words, using nucleic acids as genetic material versus something else, using as the proteins versus something else, etc. Yeah, so that's an interesting question that I think neither of these guys really addresses. Maybe you could expand the picture and have another trunk over here and a whole tree that never came to be. Maybe, right? So I would say Conway Morris would probably say, all right, fine, make your genetic material out of something else, whatever. I'm telling you, you're gonna have wings. That's a good point.
So would your adaptationists say something like that they're, like for example with the flying horse, to get a flying horse, the horse would have to evolve in such a way that it would essentially become a bird, and that instead of going into some new unexplored morphospace, it would have to go back into an area of morphospace that's already explored, and that for any sort of imaginable weird thing like that, you could argue that the space has already been explored. Is that kind of what the adaptationist is saying?
I think that you're pretty close to what most adaptationists would say. They would say, okay, so what I hear you saying is you'd like to go right there. Well, no, you'd like to go right there. And that is a very large animal. Can we just go ahead and have the forelimbs turn into wings? That would be so much easier. Like adding another hand, which sounds a little crazy too. So let's just have the forelimbs turn. So you want to get to a large winged animal. All right. You're going to have to start here in order to get there, but you're here, and it's not that easy to go backwards. And one reason it's not easy to go backwards is, no sort of law of design, but simply, you need to live in this niche right here, and someone's already there. And they've adapted to that niche for millennia, and you're dead the second you show up. And so the story would go something like that, I think. The adaptationists would say, well, there's no law that says you can't do that, but you're not going to be able to do it.
Some of what you were talking about sort of reminds me of the early television advertisements for the Dyson vacuum cleaner. The fellow gets up there and he talks about all the many avenues he explored to come up with a Dyson vacuum cleaner. And some worked and he pursued that, and that didn't work anymore, so then he went somewhere else. And looking at these dead ends, it isn't necessarily because these animals no longer worked in their environment. It could be because one of the other longer branches outcompeted.
That's a good point.
And so it's another way worked better. Not that
hence the phrase driven to extinction, not just gone.
Yeah.
Right. It's true. Can I just remind you though of the falling star. You know, everyone's happy, dinosaurs rule the earth, mammals quivering in the shadows, and then suddenly, you know, somebody waves a wand and every ecosystem on the planet is turned into something different, and now the rules are different, and you know. And now a lot of these things end because they're not adapted anymore because the environment changed, not because